Welcome to my podcast, The Sexual Shaman, Conversations on Sexuality and Spirituality. I am your host, Kenneth Ray Stubbs. This podcast-videocast series is inspired by a book I envisioned, contributed to, edited, and published 30 years ago entitled Women of the Light, The New Sacred Prostitute. This current podcast-videocast is a series of conversations with both women and men of the light, all about sexuality and spirituality. We go into the topics of Western Tantra, Western sexology, orgasm, gender, Tibetan Buddhism, contemporary shamanism, and traditional shamanism. Basically, we focus on energy and transformation in all aspects of our lives. Here we openly support all sexual orientations, all genders, all gender identifications, all races, and all ethnicities. The sponsor of this podcast is my energy training, an extensive 20-course program in developing our energetic infrastructure and our shamanic abilities to transform ourselves and others. More information is available at sexualshaman.com. Welcome to the podcast, The Sexual Shaman, Conversations on Sexuality and Spirituality. I am your host, Kenneth Ray Stubbs, and today I have a guest who's going to bring a different point of view to sexuality and spirituality, that as the point of view as an artist. And Katie Sarra, S-A-R-R-A, is here with me. She is currently living in Portugal. And let me give you a formal background introduction here. Katie is a Certified Somatic Sex Educator, a Sexological Bodyworker, and is the founder and director of the School of Relational Embodiment. Probably what's most relevant to our at least initial focus is that she is an artist and is also a certified art psychotherapist. And I want to say that I met her in the arena of sexuality at a conference in Arizona. But what was really sort of spoke to me in some other very different ways, she has done a series of paintings of what she calls seascapes. She lived near the Atlantica in the UK. She would do these awesome paintings of views of the sea. I just want to say I really appreciate being able to have seen those. But today she's going to be talking about particularly sexuality and art and how they can facilitate transformation. And she was born in Kenya. And I can imagine her running as a child barefoot, crossing Serengeti. I don't know if she ever did that, but that's just sort of this imagination that comes up in my mind. So she comes from a multicultural background, which I think is so important for our creativity. If you want to be an artist, we have to be open to our creativity and living and being in different cultural dimensions from different cultures. I totally support cultural diversity. And I think it's great to grow up in that context like that. So Katie, welcome. The reason I wanted Katie to be on is that one of the methodologies, in addition to the somatic approach to sexual healing, sexual transformation, sexual education, is she would have clients, people wanted to grow around their sexuality, come in, and she would paint them. They would be in the nude, or at least mostly in the nude, or however you can describe all this. And the whole process of a person paying attention to what's happening by being painted, I think it can be a very, very useful methodology. So, Katie, you want to explain all about that? Because I think it's totally fascinating. Because it's not a common practice among sexologists or tantric teachers to do anything like this at all. And it would take an artist to do it. I know that when I was in college, I did model, what was it? Nude modeling in the art classes, a way of making a little extra money. Given our culture around the negativity and the shame and the guilt around our bodies, limits us so much, and we get caught up in it. And if we want to be a vibrant sexual being, we have to accept our body the way it is. I've given enough introduction here. Katie, you want to share about doing that, how you came to do that, and the impact, and we'll talk about that.
Thank you, Ray. And the word acceptance feels very central here. Acceptance, I understand acceptance as synonymous with love. To accept somebody is to love them, is to receive them. Radical acceptance is the running thread through all of my work. So as a sexological bodyworker, as an artist painting people and witnessing people, to accept someone is to love them. And we all grow up with interruptions to being loved, to being accepted as we are. Yeah, learning to hide aspects of ourselves that would be rejected as part of the families or societies or communities that we grow up in. And so for most of us, especially in Western culture, we're growing up with so many aspects of ourselves in hiding, and especially our sexual expression and our naked sexual expression. These are taboo aspects of human nature to share in everyday life. My understanding of the role of the artist is to transform what has been hidden or heavy, or to transform sadness and grief into something beautiful that we can all appreciate and share together. So you were mentioning the seascapes, my deep sea paintings that I used to paint, which, the sea holds so many emotions and so many moods. And I used to paint the sea and resonate with the sea. The body of the water would be resonating with bodies of water inside of me. And I would paint and translate. I would receive the sea, and then I would receive the painting as I painted the painting of the sea. And this is very much like how I began to paint human beings, is understanding the people that came to see me, who ultimately were looking for some healing with self-love, looking for acceptance, looking to be witnessed. And you mentioned being a model for art students. So like typically a model for art students would get paid for modeling. And historically in art, it would be a male artist painting a female naked muse. And so parallel to that, I had been training for about 12 years in Tantra and then teaching Tantra. And I had been learning the radical acceptance of Namaste. I honor you as an aspect of myself. And I worked with so many people who were lonely with their bodies, lonely with their self-expression, lonely with their emotions, that were going out of the back door of their relationships to discover more of themselves, trapped in identities or versions of themselves that were denying their Eros, denying their sexual and intimate expression. And so I was working with radical acceptance, working with the Namaste, receiving people and supporting people to trust in their spontaneity and learn to trust in being witnessed and being accepted as they are. And this is when we began to work together, because I wanted to understand like what is happening in these energetic exchanges with people in this process of radical acceptance, and what happens when we open up our senses into receiving more of ourselves, and we open up our senses into gratitude and how gratitude also opens up the gates of grief and sadness of just how far we've come into separation from being loved and being accepted. And so I think all of my practice over the years has really essentially been about radical acceptance and love. And there's a quote by Donald Winnicott. It's a joy to be hidden, but a disaster never to be found. And I could have that quote tattooed on me, it's a joy to be hidden, but a disaster never to be found. I've kind of had that, and I kind of had that as a kind of a strap line that sits at the heart of my pioneering. And so I was working as a sacred intimate, working with Tantra. I was teaching Tantric groups. I was teaching Tantra in groups and teaching Tantra training. And I was also working individually with people. And so people were coming to me, paying me to witness them, to be with them, to love them, to support them with opening up their senses into feeling more of themselves and feeling all of, like feeling grief and sadness and sorrow and joy and ecstasy, and understanding that joy births from sadness and love births from the rage and the injustices of where love has been lost and interrupted, where Eros has been interrupted. So I wanted to understand what was happening energetically while I was working with body work, with this namaste, exiled aspects of humanity. And I've got quite a big bandwidth for what I attract in terms of what's been exiled. I teach from quite deep bowels of human experience, and I think maybe some of that came from Africa. There's something in my bones that has a deep bandwidth. I find myself working with extremes of human nature. I worked for 8 years in adult mental health and in acute psychiatry, working with extremes of what happens to human beings when they've lost their belonging, experiencing the distress of separation. And I understand this from being uprooted and moved from Africa to the UK as a child. I understood that actually identity and our versions of ourselves are actually all constructed. They're constructed. We get our insides from the outside first. They're constructed by the societies we live in, and they become like straitjackets. We have to hide so much of ourselves to inhabit the identities, to belong. That adaptation is painful. And so behind the scenes of society, I was working with supporting people, loving people into belonging, into more of their naturalness, and opening up their senses to feel the grief, to feel the sadness, and then the joy and the love from that.
A question. I just remembered one of the main interests I have is around something we would call shamanism. And I remember a few years ago, you're telling me that you went back to Africa to participate in some sort of a rite of passage, or I don't remember what it was, within an African community, a Black African community, because we were talking about energy. And I think that shamanic traditions are more tuned into energetic exchanges, interactions, and facilitation than, say, our Western psychological psychotherapeutic traditions. There you were growing up in Africa, in Kenya, coming back to the UK, or coming to the UK, and now you're coming back to, in a sense, some of your roots to reestablish it. It's what it sounded like to me when you told me this a few years ago. Could you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, thank you. I went to the Gabon and to study the Bwiti tradition, and I was initiated in the Bwiti in Gabon. And the Bwiti is Bwiti for me is Eros. It is like the singing and the harp playing and the dancing. The Bwiti is Eros, and it is the integration and radical acceptance of all aspects of humanity, and integrating like the polyrhythms of the harp. So I went through initiation with the Bwiti, the different tribes that make up the Bwiti. So there's 6 different languages, so that nobody has ego control. And the Bwiti is all about Eros and integration and radical acceptance. And Iboga as a medicine helps you see everything with radical acceptance. And something I noticed while I was there was I understood like the harsh life experiences that so many people had experienced. The heat there is relentless. There's a lot of poverty. But through the Bwiti, people I noticed were in a state of grace. And the word grace being like gracias, like being about gratitude. The Bwiti supports people to open up their senses and open up their seeing and open up their acceptance. If you imagine, there are so many injustices on this planet. There's so much harm being done. So many people in loneliness, so many people not belonging. And justice is healed by being with the just is. I mean, that's why I think so much like there's been a lot of therapy with MDMA to support people to move through trauma and to come into acceptance with what's happened. So justice, being with the just is. And it's that just isness, that radical acceptance-ness that is the heart of my practice. And being a conduit, I think you taught me all those years ago while I was guiding people on journeys of opening up their senses into feeling more of themselves through touch and through energy work and through moving into altered states of consciousness. I was exploring integrating, because I'd been on the school run, I'd been raising children, and then I entered into the Tantra training, and then I opened up all kinds of horizons. All kinds of horizons were opened up for me. And I was thinking, what can I paint? I was feeling really lost for inspiration. I thought, well, all I've got is like, it's just the women on the school run. That's my life, I thought, how about I begin an exploration with having been through several like Tantra trainings where I had experienced a healing of my body image and my self-acceptance and witnessed other people moving through that process of moving through the route of shamelessness. We practiced stripping a lot to exercise trusting spontaneity and exercise exhibitionism and exercise voyeurism and that's been witnessed with loving eyes. And I'd experienced the transformational relief into acceptance through these tantric structures and then facilitating that with clients. And then it became just like a natural weave. So the women from the school run, we'd sit and have coffees together. We had coffees together or cups of tea together every day. And we talked about our children and a few of, there was one particular woman. She said, I'd quite like a nude painting in my bedroom. And she's like, I think I'm going to buy a nude. I said, well, why would you put a nude in your bedroom that wasn't a nude of you? It's in your bedroom. I'll paint you. And so I began to draw her, my friend Diana. And Diana and I would paint. She would get together every week and I'd paint her. Over and over and over, I painted and I drew her. And I was practicing getting my hand-eye coordination back. But what seemed to be happening was that I was receiving her through the charcoal drawings or through the oil paintings. And then there was another friend of mine who she originally introduced me to Tantra. I painted her. I just noticed that her skin seemed to be blossoming. She was blossoming and coming alive in ways that nothing specifically physical was changing about her. And I noticed in this process of witnessing while painting somebody that a blossoming seemed to be happening. Their skin would come alive, and somehow I was connecting with what's beyond the skin. I was connecting with the flow of blood. I was connecting with energetic pathways, and understanding that when we relax out of our left brain's commodifying of our bodies into parts that can be measured or criticized or compared to other parts, when we relax out of commodifying our bodies and we relax into receiving through our senses, then we are more than the sum of the parts. My other friends from the school run began to hear about this, and I began to receive requests, private requests. Will you paint me? Will you draw me?
Was most of this nude or some partially nude or?
Nude or partially nude. It would just somehow, we would have coffee or we'd have tea in private in my studio. And I would ask people to bring along a piece of music that sang with their heart. And so people would choose their own music. I ritualized the experience. So I began with an undressing ceremony where they would take up, when they're taking off their clothes, taking off what they wanted to let go of, what they were aspects of shame or inhibition. And I listened because we were so close, our network of women on the school run, we were so close with each other. And so it was quite natural for my friends to share their stories of inhibitions and shame, and it was quite natural and quite easy, almost kind of just happened, where I would be painting or drawing them. I had charcoal or I had oil paints, and we'd be listening to music. And these paintings began to emerge, and it was, I started to paint lots of my women friends from the school run, and it was just in my community. Something quite profound was happening in this process of a person being accepted and safe while they were being witnessed and received. There was, that each person had their different story and different aspects of themselves, that sometimes I would paint the parts of them that they felt confident about. And I often had requests, oh, will you make me a bit slimmer? Or will you not include this bit of me? And I would just paint, music playing, very, very warm music that they've chosen. So on a loop. And they would choose their position, and I would paint them. People described feeling like I was massaging them with the paintbrush, or they felt my paintbrush on their bodies. It was I was receiving them through my eyes, and then like a conduit, like an instrument, I was then receiving them through the painting. So I'm directing the painting, but I'm also receiving them through the painting and receiving the painting. And I wasn't painting necessarily, I wasn't painting photographically, realistically. I was painting the energetics. I was painting people as I saw them, because even a photographer, when a photographer takes a photograph of somebody, if you're looking at something with critical or judgmental eyes, or eyes that are commodifying something, then I believe that those photographs somehow communicate the eyes of the photographer, even though this is a mechanical process. But it's even more exaggerated with painting. So I would be opening up my heart, opening up the eyes of my heart, if you like, to receive that person with radical acceptance and transform what I was seeing into beautiful painting. And very often, frequently, people would weep when they saw themselves through my eyes. It's like a reframe. I am beautiful as I am. I haven't made that person skinnier or, I've just been with them as a soul being, as an erotic, sensual, tender, exuberant, gentle, all the different qualities. Everyone's got different qualities. And and I'd also paint couples. I painted women who were in the fullness of their pregnancy to celebrate that aspect of their bodies, like women in their fullness. I called that collection. And then I began to get requests from people. Now, this is interesting, where the role of the artist, being typically a male artist painting female muses, I began to get requests from men wanting me to paint them in their sexual expression. And this was initially the husbands of the wives that I've been painting from the school run. And I would say, well, yeah, I will paint you so long as your wife's there, so that, it's really clear. And then I started to paint people who were, so I was working with lots and lots of men doing tantric sessions, lots and lots of lonely men wanting to experience acceptance with their intimate and erotic self-expression. Just some of my sessions started to become painting sessions. I was painting people, and people would just find me. I did have a website at the time, like one of those old-fashioned websites. And I also did some performance painting where I painted people in public situations, like erotica, and also the Sexual Freedom Awards. I painted people live there. And I started to do performance painting, where I was painting people with crowds of people watching. Doing so many more of these paintings, it began to snowball. People began to hear about me, and I started to get lots and lots of requests. And so I worked with people who had never been seen before, had never had sex before. And I provided an opportunity, a safe opportunity for a person to pleasure themselves. So, like part of sexological bodywork is witness masturbation. Is this again is a radical acceptance practice. So I painted people while in these individual sessions, which were an experience of them inhabiting their Eros, whatever position they wanted me to paint them in. Traditionally in art, the penis has, it's just not celebrated. There are lots of nude women in art. People don't have erect penises hanging in their living rooms. And so there's a lot of shame around erect penises, apart from in pornography, but for a person to be witnessed in their erotic self-expression without having to do anything with it, or without having to perform in any way, I was providing a safe experience for that exhibitionism, that gets so interrupted as children, like stop being too loud, stop expressing yourself, like stop, all the interruptions that people have in so much of Western culture. This goes to the heart of our genitals,
I'd like to say one little thing here. I met an art historian from the UK, and he talked about one of the British museums. He was down in the bowels of the museum, and he found this section or a tray that had, and from the sculptures, the penises had been chopped off, cut off, broken off. So, and they had a collection of male statues, penises which had been taken off. So the art that was shown up in the museum was male genital-less. So they were just sitting right there in the bowels of the museum. And so, it's as an example of how the male genitalia have been so, could say, demonized, the whole negativity around that. And so to hear publicly for a person to see themselves and embracing or including the genitalia in the penis is so contrary to the cultural artistic images that we've seen in the contemporary world. So I think that's a very healthy procedure. So I just want to give that little historical note. And also, one other thing I want to say is for listeners who are tuning into the podcast, that this whole approach that Katie's talking about is, I never heard of anything like this at all amongst sexological facilitators, people who are doing psychotherapy or sexual therapy, somatic therapy, or Tantra teachers who are using the method of painting a person so they get a chance to witness being witnessed. And it takes the compassion and the creativity of someone, as well as the skill to do that. So it's not a standard at all, not at all. I've never heard anyone else do anything like this. But I could also see how it could be incredibly profound for a person, because in my own teaching of seminars in the past, we are so negative about our physical form without the clothes. So I think that it's a breakthrough to start to include what you're doing there with the painting process. I'd like to go back to something you were referring to earlier, because my interest is in the energetic exchange, interaction, facilitation of either lovers, or in this case, of a facilitator. When you were talking about doing the painting, that often the recipient would feel where you were painting, even though they could not see where what section of their form, physical form, they were painting. And at one point earlier, you said something about we, meaning you and me, because I teach around this whole emphasis of energetic interaction at a much more subtle level, but their overall senses that something is going on, because there's an energetic dynamic that is underlying the cognitive. My thought is that to be a creative artist doing what you're doing, that there is this depth of underlying energetic simpatico, a oneness, so that you get so similar an energetic field that the recipient actually can, if they're paying attention, because they're being witnessed, because they're not talking, they're not doing the therapy, saying this is a problem, I like this, I don't want that, which gets into our head, but they're being present, it sounds like, and there's an emotional context there with the music, and there's emotional context there in terms of this is not common in our culture, painted, nude, semi-nude, or something about our sexual nature. So I'm not surprised when you said that the recipient sometimes would comment about how she or he were feeling where you were painting, even though they couldn't see it. Could you speak to that some more?
Yeah, probably really influenced from doing hundreds of tantric massages, where very, very slowly exploring a person's body with different types of touch, like really being present with every contour and that fine-tuned, slow focus, you move very, very slowly, you know, if you move along like skin very, very slowly, the mind can focus attention. And when the mind is focused, then the senses open. And if there's a degree of predictability, the mind then can trust in continuing to open, like nothing too pattern interrupting is happening. So that fine-tuned focus attention influenced when I was painting somebody, or when I'm painting someone, my focus of attention with that part of their body. I mean, they would see where my eyes are looking, and my eyes are looking, and I'm painting, you know, like I'm not necessarily, like my eyes are going between the person and, you know, imagine the canvas is there, like between the person and the painting. And it's an automatic process. Yeah, and recipients have experienced feeling like I was caressing their body in exactly the same place that I was painting, sharing that sense of being touched.
My experience too, starting off, first I was in academia, did my hippie trip, then I went into massage, did massage professionally to be really present with the touch. It was after that that I sort of evolved into, slipped into the underlying energetic, because being present with the physical touch, you get to know at some level, at a deeper level, the body, especially when the person's nude on the table, or at least semi-nude. I'm finding this interesting that that's how one of the ways you stepped into it, which is not standard in our culture. Focused touch is not in our general Western culture. In general, a lot of subculture differences. That's just not common. Or there's a hug that's being unconscious, or a touch that's being unconscious, lovemaking that's being unconscious, which is really problematic. But to be conscious with doing the way you're describing what you're doing, in my experience of teaching erotic massage, for example, you have to be present, and that can step you into a more subtle aspect. So I think for people who's considering going into being some sort of a sexuality facilitator, touching the body is going to be a very important part of the skill set. Where that might take you is going to vary, but that's really, really important.
I understand Eros and sexual expression being like flowers blooming, being like trees fruiting, being like birds singing. Eros is in nature, like mushrooms appearing, like the word pupui in the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Camara. Eros is like the force of nature, and is exuberant and expressive. And in the Bwiti, the singers and the drummers and the harp players and the different instruments, everybody is trusting in the self-organizing nature of self-expression. The ceremonies with people singing is like there's synchronization, and then there's pattern interrupt, and everybody's saying yes to the next invitation, and it's like birds in a forest, like in a chorus. All the different voices make the harmony. And I understand Eros to be the life force that is in service of integrating all the voices. In service is generous. There's that triangle teaching from the Kadoshka teachings that we're both familiar with exhibitionism, voyeurism, and trusting spontaneity. And exhibitionism is our generosity, our generous self-expression, that all plants and animals are naturally expressing themselves without shame. Birds sing, like in the Bwiti, the whole tribe, or the tribes that have come together, they are trusting in their spontaneity and singing at the tops of their voices and dancing, like it's full power, it's full self-expression, celebratory power. And they are singing from like the depths of, it's only really from the depths of grief and the depths of rage and the depths of sadness and the depths of separation that kind of joy can birth. That kind of exuberant joy can birth. If joy attempts to birth without being rooted or like disconnected from the waters of these aspects of humanity and nature, it is just manic defense. It is it's a superficial ornamentation, compensation, hedonistic compensation. The Bwitis, the songs are exuberant. They're exuberant to the same depths as the opposite of exuberance, like the strings of a harp. The harmony is in the attention of the pole opposites. So I understand Eros to be the integration of, it's in service to integration, and so much of our self-expression has been interrupted, and Eros builds pressure in our genitals, in our needs and our longings for union back into like God again, back into the collective love. This pressure builds up. It's so tender. And this triangle I'm talking about, so exhibitionism, which is our generosity that animals and plants and don't have a problem with. And what happens with humans is the voyeurism part of this triangle, which is the witness. Like for humans, our mirror neurons have bent in on themselves, and we have this internal dialogue, the default mode network, as it's called, that is constantly circling 24/7, maintaining our identity and maintaining the versions of ourselves. We lose our belonging and we're cast out from belonging is so painful. Humans will do anything to belong. And I kind of understand that pretty much all spiritual paths are supporting this in different ways, supporting us to learn how to trust in our spontaneity and be attuned with our naturalness to express ourselves. Shame is a natural, it's a survival. It's a survival mechanism that where the dorsal vagus nerve literally takes down brain structures when we're in when we've lost our belonging, when we are in extreme panic from with loss or with grief or with something traumatic happening to us. That dorsal vagus will literally shut down the executive parts of the brain, shut down the speech centers, shut down the hippocampus from remembering, and immobilize us. But we're still receiving all that data, but just not consciously. And that shame mechanism is to help us not see the harm that's been done, to not feel the harm that's been done, is to cocoon us from the pain of separation. And what gets cocooned will be like one of the people I worked with described these parts of her being like an untuned station, that unless these parts of ourselves are tuned into and welcomed into being received and witnessed with radical acceptance, to be given the opportunity to be just is with the just is, then all of the energy bound up in hiding can be relaxed. All the muscles and ligaments and fascia of the body that has been holding us in to hold on can relax and, spontaneously come back into harmony. And Eros is the driving force to support us revisiting what we couldn't be with in our histories, when we, this shame mechanism cocooned us, where we lost our belonging in some way. We lost where love, like love itself, was betrayed. Birthright to be accepted and loved. It's for most of us that's interrupted somewhere along the line, somewhere in our lives in different ways, some more profoundly impactful than others. And I understand Eros to be the driving force, like the universal driving force, that is in service of integration of all these exiled aspects of ourselves. And that's possibly why Jack Morin, in his book The Erotic Mind, he talks about troublesome turn-ons. So people can feel aroused by something that is forbidden or impossible, or will magnetically attract relationships to repeat until that harm, what's interrupted love and self-acceptance, can be accepted and seen. The function, I've spent a lifetime trying to understand, like, why do human beings project? What is the function of projection? Why is projection necessary? Like to live in somebody else's projection is like, it can be psychic death. It's like living in a hologram, living in the reflection of living, adapting to somebody else's version of ourselves. And the antidote to that is to receive, open our senses and receive, and to be witnessed. And the function of projection, as I see it, as I understand it, is it's in service to, if I project into you idolized all negative versions that are of what I've idolized versions of what I haven't digested yet myself, or like negative versions of aspects of myself that is too painful for me to acknowledge and be with. The hope is that that other human being that I'm projecting into might be able to offer me a reflection of myself. I might see myself as, in the mirror of this other human being, in their eyes, in their being might support me to see myself differentiated out of myself. Like there's the hope with projection and projective identification, where another person becomes like a puppet, where you can find yourself in relationship agreements that you hadn't agreed to. Like you can find yourself feeling like you're receiving something from this other human being that it's all in service for integration and coming together to make love with another human being. To have sex with another human being is in service for like coming together to make love. I mean, literally make love, like to love and to be loved, and to like biologically, all the biomes of the bacterial worlds all coming together and to integrate. I see the Eros is the force of God, force of nature, to support us integrating aspects of ourselves or aspects of humanity that have been exiled, that have been cast out, that have become cocooned in moments when it was just too painful to be with the loss of belonging.
All right. We could go on for another hour, I'm sure. I greatly appreciate you bringing a different conceptualization of how we can embrace our body, our sexuality, to celebrate Eros. And I'm hearing that's part of the role of the artist, is to help us to move into a celebration of our nature, our full nature. Any final words of wisdom you would like to share, in addition to what you've already shared?
I'm so grateful to you, Ray. I'm so grateful because I'm ever fine-tuning like my service, my participation as part of the ecosystem of human beings and the transformations of pain and suffering and separation into gifts. And I'm so grateful for the many hours that we've spent together exploring the different dimensions of time, space, and reality, and different aspects of being human and being an animal as part of the ecosystem. Yeah, ultimately our connection with love, and how Eros is in service for us to inhabit these different dimensions of time, space, and reality, and to integrate what has been cast out of the ecosystem of what we accept, as we're multi-dimensional beings. And you have been like a primary teacher and guide and mentor through this process of learning radical acceptance and learning how to receive and open up the senses, through the skin through visual into the other dimensions of being human.
Well, thank you for the very kind words. I appreciate that. So for readers, viewers in this case, or listeners, if you would like to learn more about Katie Sarra, or study or be involved in her training processes, you can go to relationalembodiment.org. relationalembodiment.org. She has several websites, but that's a good one to start with. And she's involved in doing a lot of training of people who are facilitating others around celebrating our sexual nature, celebrating our sexuality. Again, I greatly appreciate what I've experienced with your seascapes. I think they're awesome. Thank you very much, Katie, for sharing little bits and pieces of your life, your philosophy. You're stepping into, in the process, you're stepping into the unknown about painting the other women in your circles, and that's going on further and further and further. So I think it could be a very, very meaningful methodology that I know that's something I could never have done, because all I could draw was stick people. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom and your life. And the podcasts here are sponsored by my particular training program called the Energy Training, which is about going into these very subtle but very powerful transformative processes that underlie the psychological, the behavioral, the somatic. It's basically, I want to keep referring back to shamanism because it's from some traditional shamans that I discovered this. They wouldn't teach it. You'd had to perceive how they were doing, how they were being, what they were being energetically. And that is where the teaching was, and not in this particular cultural expression, because I didn't have to become a part of that culture. It was like just the way they were functioning energetically whether it be Tibetan lamas or traditional shamans. The being is conveying so much wisdom. We can learn from it if we're able to tune into that. And that's what I teach about, tuning into and becoming that. So, Katie, again, thank you for joining. I invite everyone to celebrate Eros and explore your sexuality, whatever it is to you. I support, this podcast supports all sexual orientations, all sexual gender identities, all races, all ethnicities. So be yourself, whatever that is celebrate it. Katie, thank you so much. I'm sure our paths shall cross again. Have fun there in the mountains of Portugal with all that intense energy in the place that you're living. Wish you well with your new program coming out into the world. Bye-bye, my dear.
Bye-bye, Ray.